Hey everyone, this is Brian at F Studios, and today I'm going to talk about mastering on the AW4416 and its siblings. Okay, so there's been a number of people over the years that have expressed that they can't get good masters off the AW4416, and they resort to using DAWs to be able to do that. A lot of people now are just using the AW to record the material, and then they transfer everything over to the DAW to mix and do everything they want to do to the music there. And that's fine, but it's not a necessary process to do. The AW4416 and its siblings are far more than capable of producing a professional mix and master for the user. Mastering today is a little bit different than what it used to be. Back in the day when vinyl was the main medium for listening to music, mastering was a much more technical, complicated process as well as an artistic process than what we have to deal with now in the digital age. Back then, the mastering engineer had to be able to set up the tape machine properly, make sure it's calibrated right in order to sound right, as well as set up the cutting lathe that would cut the record properly. You had to work with the record producers and the artists to figure out what track order to put everything in. You had to deal with figuring out about how much time you wanted to have spaced in between each song. You had to decide if you wanted to have a 33 RPM record or a 45 RPM record, or any other kind that they make in between that. All these things are going to end up affecting how loud the music can be processed onto or cut onto the record. And then you have to figure out like other issues, like when your track order, are you starting with the song? You got to start with the songs that are going to be the most energetic. They'll have, because they're going to need the most resolution out of the record. And a record reproduces better audio at the beginning of the record where it's spinning faster, it has higher resolution than it does towards the end of the record where it's physically spinning more slowly. And then the record also had other limitations, like when we're talking about that when stereo became the thing back in the late 60s, early 70s, records don't like phased material. The needle doesn't like being pulled in different directions at the same time. So if you had strong phasing from the master tape mix, the master mix on tape, that's going to have to be dealt with before it's able to go onto the cutting lathe. Records don't like to have strong low frequencies because too much low frequency is going to make the needle skip. If your low frequencies are too strong on the sides, it's going to make your needle skate. This information, of course, is what I read from looking into this for years, trying to figure out, well, how do you just do this process properly for vinyl records? Whether it's actually true or not, I don't know, because I have never heard anything directly from an old school mastering engineer's mouth as to whether this has been a problem. Things were kind of a problem up until 74 or 78 when they got a newly designed cutting lathe and made the process much more forgiving and easier. But like one of the other problems was high frequencies. You didn't want strong high frequencies on your record because the cutting lathe couldn't keep up with those frequencies, and it ended up just cutting square waves into the record instead of nice sine waves. Perhaps maybe after that new lathe that came out in 1974 or 78, whatever you said it was, maybe those issues disappeared or were not as bad as what they were before. But these were the inherent problems with the medium itself. While the tape was able to go up to 20K or better, you know what I mean? So yeah, they had to employ a bunch of tools in order to make that mix from the tape translate and work well onto the vinyl record. Multi-band compression, de-essers, mid-side processing, all kinds of stuff. Those same tools can be used to enhance the audio, but a lot of times they were probably more often than not used as fix-it tools for getting the mix to work right on the record. Nowadays, we are not confined by anything like that. Today, in the digital spectrum, we can pretty much do anything we want to do with our music. You want to have things ridiculously out of phase and between left and right channels? You can do that. It isn't going to hurt a damn thing. You want to have super strong frequencies in the left or right channels, or even in the center? Go right ahead. It's going to work. So the mastering process has gotten much simpler, at least for the majority of us out there. All we really have to worry about is making sure this master works for the streaming platforms that we're uploading our music to. And that entails kind of two things, maybe three things that you got to kind of look out for when you're doing the master. One is the big one. There's no industry standard on how loud the masters should be because for all the different platforms, because everybody is using a normalization algorithm that's going to just change your volume level to whatever the particular platform is wanting it to be right now. And they do it based on an average of the overall volume of the track. It's not a compressor. It doesn't compress your audio. It doesn't limit your audio. All it is going to average out what your total average volume is and either turn it up or turn it down to match what their needs are. Majority of places are going to turn you down. A few places might turn you up. So you're going to want to produce a master that's going to be loud enough that it works across all the platforms. Because all of us, or almost all of us, we're probably not big enough that we can have direct access to each one of the streaming platforms and make an individual master for each one. That's probably not very productive in the first place. The majority of us are going to be using distribution administrators like CD Baby or DistroKid. What's some of the others? TuneCore. Can't think of any more than that, but I know there's more than that. But right now, yeah, I'm escaping it. Those places are only going to allow you to upload one file, and they're going to distribute out to everybody they work with. So you got to make sure your master is going to be at least loud enough to cover the whole gambit as far as how they're all going to turn you down. And it's probably still a smart idea just to forget about what those platforms industry or those platforms level normalization levels are, and just mix your track or master your track to be as loud as other professional tracks in your genre. Because in the case that there's a few places that don't normalize your audio, you still want it to be on par with with the level of volume from some other person, other artist that's on there, especially the pros. And the reason why is simply because the listener does not want to have to continue fiddling with their volume control while they're going through listening to music on the playlist. That's really it. You don't want them sitting there having to turn you up to listen to you after just listening to the last guy, and then the next guy comes on and blows them out of the water because they're now too fucking loud and have to turn back down. You want everything to be consistent so that the listener can just set the music up and listen and enjoy what there is without having to mess with everything every song. Kind of a one and done thing. So you want to be able to create a master that's going to cover the whole gambit there, okay? You also want to look out for your peaks when it comes to mastering. The reason being is that everybody out there pretty much converts your audio into an MP3 or some form of lossy audio. And for whatever reason, the algorithm that does that seems to increase the transients of the audio about 2 dB, 1 to 2 dB. And for whatever reason, who knows why that is? Only the people who design that stuff and it probably really knows why that is. But I don't know why that is. And what this is going to do is it's going to set you up to where you're going to have digital clipping, distortion in a compressed audio format. And that can end up creating artifacts that you aren't going to necessarily want to have hearing. You don't want to have happening within your music while, your people are playing back the track, because it's not going to sound all that good. So it's not quite as important as working with making a loud enough master to work across the platforms, but it is still something you want to look out for. So when it comes to mastering, you would probably be best to take whatever you do for master and have it converted into an MP3 and listen to it and see how it sounds compared to the original master, and just try to see whether or not any weird issues, distortion, weird artifacts are coming through. In the old days, there was a lot of stuff I did where when I uploaded it or converted it to MP3, it would have this washed out, shimmery sound on the top end that sounded like it was being put through a high pass filter, and then a chorus or a phaser or a flanger was put on that, and then it was blended back in with the original track. And it was, what the hell is that? Well, I've always been told, well, everybody else who hasn't got that issue, they're actually uploading music that's a bit quieter than what I've noticed I usually had done with my music. My music, being that it was hard rock, was just slammed right up to the left, to the near 0 dB. It wasn't such an issue with higher bitrate MP3s, say getting up there into the 160 or the 390, what was it, 392, something like that, kps, kilobytes per second. But at the CD quality standard they had back when MP3 first started becoming the norm, which was 128 kilobytes a second, that issue was very apparent in my music, and it was apparent in some big pro names as well that were new to the format. And it's distracting. It's not something you want. It sounds like crap, okay? So that is something you're going to want to look out for, but that's going to be something you're going to need to basically trial and error until you get to where you're at a point to where you realize, well, I know this is going to sound okay because I've already had so much experience doing it before. It's not an issue. So how do you create a master that's loud, whether you're using the AW or not? It basically comes down mostly to your mix. You need to mix things to sound loud to start with before you're really going to get any kind of loudness out of the master. Because when it comes to the master, and you're only working with a 2-track source, everything is already on there. So there's really nothing you can do except compress that one track. And if you compress that track, it's compressing everything, not just certain things on there. So you got to be wary of what's going on in your mix first. You want a loud mix that mostly comes from compressing things that eat up more headroom, like the transients from percussion tracks, like drums or whatnot. So you can reduce their dynamic range, give yourself more headroom in the master bus, and be able to pull things up louder. Also, compressing the dynamic range of the individual tracks will allow you to pull their individual volumes up louder too. Because what we normally hear that translates to us as being louder are things that resonate longer. That's transient is way louder than my voice right now. But what we hear, that resonance that comes through, is really no different than where my voice is right now, as far as the level goes. So if I want that clap to sound even louder, I would compress it so it reduces the transients down into an area that's a more closely related area to where the resonant sound of that clap is, and then I can turn the whole thing up. That will make it sound louder, even though it's still only producing the same amount of voltage going through the master bus or even the track that it's recorded on. And what I'm talking about is when it comes to your output, whether it's you're reading in a 0 dB or anything else, the voltage signal is 1 volt peak to peak. You don't get any hotter than that. You try to push hotter than that through that stuff, through the tracks, through the master bus, it doesn't work. It's just not set up that way. So what we normally hear easiest, of course, is going to be mid-range frequencies. And that means they're going to take up the least amount of headroom on your master bus. They're going to take up the least amount of headroom to mix properly, to have them sound balanced within the individual tracks. Low frequencies and high frequencies we don't hear as well. So if we want them to sound balanced, more balanced, they actually require to be pushed up louder than the more mid-range sources. And that's going to eat up more headroom on the master bus, obviously. So we don't want that to happen. We want to be able to properly balance all that stuff. That's really is where compression comes in. It's to just help control that stuff. Open up the headroom on all the channels and the master bus by reducing transients and increasing the resonance levels that you can get off all that stuff. And when it comes to loudness, once all that stuff's taken care of, we will perceive something as louder if it has louder mid-range frequencies now, because you got more headroom opened up to push those up higher. We will perceive it as louder if our vocals stand out louder. We will perceive it as louder if the percussion instruments, like the drums, have more resonance on them. Even though in reality, they're still only pushing the same amount of voltage out of the master bus or the individual tracks as they would have been before, without doing all that stuff. So you get it down to where it's a nice, balanced, but yet loud, powerful sounding mix. Then you can go to the mastering stage. And through the use of compression and limiters, you can give it that last little bump and really get up there to where it just sounds slamming. It just sounds bitching. And it's up there at the same levels that we hear from all the modern day producers that are out there. It doesn't matter what genre you're in, it's just as loud. Other tools to help you with that, of course, like I said, we hear mid-range frequencies easier. EQ is important. EQ the right frequencies, and it will only change the level on of the output bus a little bit, but as far as what we can tell from listening, it'll make a big difference as what we hear. It'll just still sound louder. Those mid-range frequencies, like I said, come through easier. We hear them much easier than we hear everything else. So what does it take to make a good master nowadays? Really, all you need are three things: a good EQ, a compressor, and a limiter. You want a compressor to help what they usually call is like glue everything together. Really what you're doing is you're still compressing the dynamic range while giving it some room to breathe with the transients to come through. You're not allowing it to get overly loud in the top end when something's pushing really hard. It may only be increasing 4 dB when in reality it should be increasing 10 dB, but you got it squished down so much, it's not going to do that. And it gives you more headroom still to, at the very end of the stage, to place a limiter on it and push the volume up even higher. You don't want to do it all with a limiter because depending on what equipment you're using, once you start getting past a certain threshold, it just doesn't sound good anymore. And with a limiter, if you are cutting down maybe 5 dB or maybe more, it really gets rid of a lot of the life of the track. What I mean is, like, you might hear the instruments louder, whether it's like keys or guitars or brass sections or whatever, they might be louder, but everything else in there that was more dynamic, like the drums, they're going to be lost in the mix. You won't have anything that sounds all that good with those. And you got to realize that there's only a couple options when it comes to this as far as how to approach it. You can either leave it alone and not get it up to the levels that it should be if you can't do it, or you employ other tools that will help you get the levels up there while still maintaining the basic sound that you're looking for from those percussion instruments or whatever else that might be getting lost if you're having to limit things too hard to get the levels up to where you want to be. And that would be like clipping. There's reasons why there's soft clippers out there, and on the AW, it's just you just automatically push it up over the levels and it goes into clipping. But if you're going to employ clipping, you want to be sure whatever distortion it's creating, you aren't hearing. So if you're having to push your levels up so high that you start hearing distortion, you've gone too far. You need to go back to the mix and rethink how you're doing things. So the AW, it actually has the three basic things that you need to do mastering. The compressors on the AW are really good. A lot of people don't like them because they're too clean. They don't add color like if you were to use some other piece of outboard gear compressor would. And that's because that's how this machine was set up. It's supposed to be clean. They're completely transparent. If you want color added, you use the EQ to do that. The EQ system is also really good on this thing. It's processes at 56-bit. You got 4 bands that are completely parametric. They can sweep from 20 hertz all the way to 20K. 2 of those bands can give you shelving and high pass, as well as being set up for just a certain frequency and sweep it and with really fine detail where you can cue it to just very, very close to just the individual frequency spectrums. And each band can stack up on top of each other. If you set 2 bands to the same frequency, cut one, cut the other, it will increase however much you cut altogether. Say they have an 18 dB cut and boost. You can put, say, 2 bands together at 1K. You can cut one at 18 dB, and then you can go to the next one, and you can cut that 18 dB. It pulls everything down to 36 dB, negative 36 dB. I haven't tried it, but you could try weird techniques where you would put the 2 bands really close to one another, and then cut one, boost the other. That's an old trick they used to do with Pultec EQs back in the day. It might not work though on the AW because just of how it's made, how the software is made that runs inside this thing. And then limiters. The limiter on the AW runs off the compressor algorithm. A limiter is nothing more than a compressor. It just has infinite compression and it has really fast reacting release times, maybe even attack times. Now with the AW, you can set this thing up, the compressor up as a limiter by just telling it you want infinite compression. You can set its threshold wherever you feel like you need it. And then the attack time is as fast as 0 milliseconds, which every bit as good as a look ahead compression algorithm. And then its release can be as quick as 5 milliseconds if you're running a 24-bit, 6 milliseconds if you're just running at 16-bit. And that's pretty fast. You're not going to notice that unless you got this thing constantly bouncing around with whatever kind of audio is on there. Then it's going to start making things sounding distorted. As well as if you compress too hard, then it is going to actually start creating those distortion harmonics at some point and give you that. It might give you that saturation sound you're looking for if you were trying to use it as a New York compression process where you bring it up just underneath the regular master to add that little bit of distortion in there, that saturation that would happen from just over compressing the signal. But those are the 3 things you need, at least. And then with the flexibility of these mixing systems on this device, you can set this thing up to also give you multi-band EQ. You can set it up to give you a mid-side processing, and you can set it up for de-essing. You can set it up for notch filtering, all by just using the input section of the AW, running a signal through multiple channels, and then setting up bandpass filters, low pass, high pass, different frequency ranges. You'll have to experiment with how you want those to cross over to get it all to work right. and sound right without any processing going on. But essentially, it can be done and it does work. Over the years, I've showed how to do all these different things in different videos and showed that they do work. It does the job that it's supposed to do, just like if you would buy a regular processor that would do that job. So if you were just to run a really good mix right into the master bus on the AW here, you could essentially get a really good master simply by using the EQ feature and limiter on the track. But depending on how your mix is, there may be more to it that you want to do. And in that case, you just create your stereo master mix and then re-upload that onto a separate set of monitor tracks, recorder tracks in the AW, and then go through that whole process of where you're setting up the mixer to act as mid-side processors, multi-band compressors, de-essers, whatever you might want to have. And then if you still felt like it, you can use the auxiliary outputs to run into other processing devices just to do whatever it is you want to do. Really, it all comes just down to experimenting. But in the end, to get a really good master off the AW4416, it's super simple. All you got to do is just make sure you start with a good mix, and then on your master channel, you tweak the EQs, and you put the limiter in place and boost it up. If you need to use clipping to get it where you want to be, you can employ a limiter setting, but you give it an attack time. And then you adjust the release times so that everything still sounds natural, but you're able to really get that volume level pushed up there higher and higher. So let's go ahead and take a listen to a track I have that's been mixed, and I think it's been mixed pretty damn well, but it hasn't been mastered. This is a track that I've been working on myself. It used to be a demo from years ago, and now I've revamped it to try and make a more commercially viable product. But let's go ahead and see just what we can do with this as far as mastering goes. First of all, you listen to the track, the whole thing, kind of take notes, try to listen to figure out what you think it's going to need, and then you start from there. So let's go ahead and take a listen. This track is called Inside the Mind of a Madman. It's off my theatrical rock album, Delve Deep Inside the Mind of a Madman. It's the first track.
Inside the mind of a madman, there is nothing much to see. Maybe a product of the violence, and smut is all he be. A possible chemical imbalance, maybe just water on the knee. No, that's not right. That couldn't be. That's just silly. To diagnose one's state of mentality, one must first observe his actions in the physicality. You can't just cut him open and look for something broken. You wouldn't know what to look for anyway. And through these observations, you may look for some relation to some similar cases from days gone by. And from these realizations, you begin examinations of his mind. Maybe he's got brief psychotic disorder. the mind of a madman, there is nothing much to see. A ganglion of neurons and fatty tissues is all he be. Possible oxygen starvation caused this now monstrosity. Possibly. What else could it be? Inside the mind of a madman, there is nothing much to see. Maybe this crazed psychotic killer suffers from malformed synapses. A generous blast of paranoia is all he really needs to do his deed. That despicable deed.
All right, so that mix, in my opinion, to my ears, that mix sounds pretty darn good. There's a few things I would like to address later on with this before I actually do a full master with it, and that would be the main vocal. There's just some plosives in there that I would like to get rid of, but I like how everything sounds, so I don't want to change that. But looking at this, I'm noticing that musically, much of the instruments kind of fall within the range of about negative 15 dB. That's where they hover. When we get into the lead track, or where the guitar solo comes in, everything pushes up to where it's around negative 4 dB, maybe negative 2 at most. But the drums, through the whole time, still stay up there right around 0 dB. The transits still come in that strongly. Now, I was watching my compressor I have on the master channel, which is set up as limiter. right at 0 dB, and it never got engaged. So it was never having to deal with audio. It was being pushed any higher than 0 dB. So at the end of the track, then, where it just faded out there, we're only dealing with negative 20 dB is where the sustained tone is. So I have this much headroom, this much play with the dynamic range of this track to work with. Now, how would I actually get it to come out sounding louder than what it already is? I mean, it sounds fairly loud right now, but I can probably make it sound even louder so that it can be more comparable with other music on the streaming platforms that might be playing along with it. Now, if I had the other tracks that I wanted to use, I could put up another track here that's like a reference track so I can compare volumes. And to do that, what I would do is I would take this mix and put it on a 2-track mix, re-upload it into its own tracks, and then set up another song that's going to be used as a reference track. I'm not going to do that, though, because this video, if it gets on YouTube, they're going to demonetize it, as they might even block the audio of the track of the video during that portion of the video, wherever that track plays. That because it's a pro level copyrighted track, right? That you're supposed to be dealing with, and YouTube's been getting really shitty about that lately. So I'm not going to do that. This particular track, if we're happy with how it sounds, we would create a master setup using the same settings for the scenes that we have, but we would add a different setting for the dynamics and a different setting for the master bus's EQ, and we'd have to put that in each one of the scenes that are used for the mix here. Otherwise, we're going to lose them. Let's go through. Let's just start at the beginning, and what we're going to do right now is we're just going to add in a broad, high frequency shelving EQ just to see what happens.
Inside the mind of a madman, there is nothing much to see. Maybe a product of the violence, and smut is all he be.
Okay, so right now I'm starting out at 10 kilohertz, and I've increased it 6.5 dB. It didn't really make any difference that we can really hear through the headphones. So we're going to bring this frequency down.
A possible chemical imbalance, maybe just water on the knee. No, that's not right. That couldn't be. That's just silly.
Now, that in itself has seemed to make a little bit of a difference. I brought the frequency down to a 3.17 kilohertz. We're going to just do a back and forth comparison, okay? Just get it set up to where we can hear everything playing. And put this back down to 3.17 with the 6.5 increase. That's turned off, yep.
Of mentality, one must first observe his actions.
So this is with the EQ on,
you can't
and that's
just
with it off.
cut him open and
On.
look for something broken.
Off.
You wouldn't know what to look
On.
for anyway.
Off. So right there, just by doing that, we made the vocals stand out even more while still maintaining the balance of the rest of the mix. Everything still sounds pretty consistent, and if I look at my meters, there's not a lot of change going on here.
And through these observations, you may look for some relation to some similar cases from days gone by. You begin examining
So by adding 6.5 dB into the 3.17 kilohertz range and above, we've increased the overall output of the track by about 2-3 dB with how it sounds, or without how it actually comes out through the meter. But it doesn't really sound like it's affected anything of the music itself. It just affected the vocals and made them stand out more. So it ends up being perceived as being even louder, if this is making sense to you. Let's keep going back and forth just to show you what's what.
Here's mine.
Off.
Maybe he's got brief psychotic
On.
disorder. Or perhaps he has schizophrenic
Off.
disorder. It's really hard to
On.
say within his mental state if he's only got one phone.
So that's made it overall more clear. It has a perception of being even louder, and not much has really changed as far as the overall output on the master bus. Now let's see how this is affecting the compressor, the limiter that's on the master bus.
Inside the mind of a madman, there is nothing much to see. Maybe a product of the violence, and smut is all he be.
Now showing here it's about -60 dB.
Imbalance, maybe just water on the knee. No, that's not right. That
Still roughly
couldn't
the
be.
same.
That's just silly. To diagnose one state of mentality,
So doing that increase with EQ did not change how it's affecting the dynamics processing at all. So we still have pretty much the same amount of headroom that we can then begin to open up by just pulling that limiter down and seeing just how loud we can make this track. So in this range, let's just go ahead and start that in this range and see what we can do here. Okay, so now we're just going to see what happens when we start adding the limiter to this. How much can we bring it down to be able to then reboost the signal to be as loud as we want it to be, right?
to diagnose one state of mentality, one
All right, so I've already cut it down just -8 dB. It's already starting to play havoc with this thing. I don't like how it's interacting with the drums at all.
must first observe his actions in the physicality.
However, having done this, I can boost this sound up another 6 to 8 dB.
You can't just cut him open and look for something broken.
There's 6 dB.
You wouldn't know what to look for anyway. And through these
That's 8
observations,
dB. See, way too much. We're already getting into distortion. We're getting into clipping. And that just does not work for this kind of track, especially since we have our attack time set at 0 milliseconds and the release time at 6 milliseconds. The thing is just bouncing around right now.
look for some relation to some similar cases from days gone by. And from these realizations you begin examination.
Now, just opening up the attack on this thing and increasing the release to, well, it's 9 milliseconds for the attack, release to 12 milliseconds. It smoothed out the sounds significantly, but it still sounds a little too harsh. For this kind of track, it's way too punchy. This is not the kind of setup I want to do for this track. I want something different. So what do? We're going to bring everything back to 0. Output back to 0. And this time, I'm just going to change the shape of the limiter, the compressor.
Of his mind. Maybe he's got brief psychotic disorder.
So what I've done is right there, I've given this compressor, this limiter, a knee of its 4. And that's doesn't really mean jack shit, but it's 0 to 5 is our range we can use, and I'm using 4, which makes it a pretty soft knee. And in doing so, it's already pre-compressing the music.
Or perhaps he has schizophrenia.
It looks like it's actually squashing the music down about 2 dB. So it's pre-compressing negative 2 dB right from the start.
Disorder. It's really hard to say within his mental state if he's only got one phone or maybe all.
But something that you may want to notice right there, with that little bit of pre-compression, when my vocals got soft, even though I was using the compressor post EQ, it made my vocals quieter compared to the rest of the music, compared to if I use a hard knee setting, which is just a linear slope in the compression curve up until you hit that infinite compression level.
And so we try to rationalize, hoping to conclude in time the ailments within our patient's head.
And it doesn't make a difference if I switch the mode between post EQ or pre EQ. So we might have to make a few more changes here to make this soft knee work. I mean, why would I want to use this soft knee anyway? Maybe I don't want it so hard or so soft. Maybe I have a steeper or sharper curve there.
But to dismay, we come to say we cannot figure out what's wrong with him.
But if you notice there, I was able to turn the volume up another 4 dB without actually getting into any kind of unwanted clipping or distorted sounds.
Inside the mind of a madman, there is nothing much to see. A ganglion of neurons and fatty tissues is all he be. Possible oxygen.
I've pushed the volume way up now to 8.5 dB above 0. And just now am I starting to really notice there's distortion coming in where I don't want to hear that stuff happening. And it might actually not be real distortion that I'm hearing. It might be the effect of the attack and release time on this limiter working so quick, just bouncing around in there, creating that effect.
Starvation caused this now monstrosity. Possibly. What else could it be? Inside the mind of a madman, there is nothing.
By the time I got to that point where I have 133 milliseconds set on the release, now I'm starting to hear it affect the kick. So it sounds like it's compressing the kick a lot harder and potentially making it, punchier. But it's not the kind of punch we want. This is actually kind of making it sound over compressed. So 8.5 dB is really way too loud for this track, for this setup. We need to bring it back a bit, or we need to make some other adjustments to the knee and the attack time.
Much to see. Maybe this crazy psychotic killer suffers from malformed synapses. A generous blast of paranoia is all he really needs to do his deed. That despicable. To diagnose one's state of mentality, one must first observe his actions in the physicality. You can't just cut him open.
Now, what I've got here, I'm using the limiter still with the knee setting of 4, but I'm giving it an attack time of 11 milliseconds and a release time of 46 milliseconds, and I've been able to turn the output up 9 dB. And this is probably still getting into the clip range because we're still only hitting the threshold at 0 dB, and without the gain, the knee is still only pre-compressing the sound down to about -2, -4 dB. But with the settings that they're on there, you don't hear the clipping. You don't hear any harsh distortion or anything like that. This is the example of soft clipping that's just you can just use in the AW built right in. Okay?
And look for something broken, you wouldn't know what to look for.
Yeah, actually it's showing me that it's compressing when the drums hit down another 5 dB. It's compressing -5 dB. So this is working out pretty well, at least at this part of the track. What's it going to sound like, though, once you get into the louder portions of the track? This might be too much.
Anyway, and through these observations.
Okay, right there, when the kick came in with the little roll and the cymbal hits, it made it sound just too distorted. There was too much happening there. So it needs to be dialed back a bit, in my opinion.
You may look for some relation to some similar cases from days gone by. And from these realizations you begin examinations of his mind.
That's pulling it down from 9 to 6 dB. It sounds a lot smoother now. It just sounds better overall. It's still not quite as loud, but it just doesn't have that point of saturation that's happening in there from being over compressed or the soft clipping being just too much for this kind of track.
Maybe he's got brief psychotic disorder.
So now I'm going to try just cutting down some other frequencies, like low mid frequencies, see what happens. Trial and error here is what this is.
Or perhaps he has schizophreniform disorder. It's really hard to say within his mental state if he's on.
I'm going to get that damn skeeter if it's the last thing I ever do. This one's fast. All right, so I cut down the 375 hertz range, 6.5 dB, and it kind of made it sound a little hollow, but it also ended up making the really low frequencies boost up more, and that's because of what's happening with the compressor. What would happen if I changed, though, from post EQ to pre EQ?
He got one phone, or maybe
It definitely made a difference in the tone.
and so we try to
Personally speaking, that sounds much heavier, much fuller, and better balanced using pre-EQ now that I made these adjustments. But I don't think I necessarily want it to sound this way. So we're going to go back to the master EQ and make some more adjustments.
To say we cannot figure out what's wrong with him. Inside the mind of a madman, there is nothing much to see. A ganglion of neurons and fatty tissues is all he be. Possible oxygen starvation caused this now monstrosity. Possibly. What else could it be?
Again, this is how the original mix sound.
Inside the mind of a madman, there is nothing much to see. Maybe this crazy psychotic killer suffers from malformed synapses, a generous blast of paranoia.
And that's how it sounds after some EQ work on the master channel and just a little bit of compression with some limiting and gain boost, of course. And it's not made a huge difference in how much voltage is being pushed out or how loud it is dB wise for like the overall average volume of the track, but it's really made an impact with how loud it seems to sound listening to this thing.
He is all he really needs to do his deed. That despicable.
Now, there's still some things when the cymbals hit, I don't like how they sound. They sound a little... It still sounds like the compressor's hitting too hard with them. So I may still turn down the volume a little bit more, or I may relax the threshold a bit, bring it back up so it's not hitting too much. But right now, I want to see what would be the difference if I were to just give a low shelving EQ and cut everything from there rather than to just cut down. Gotcha. Cut down just the low mids. So we're going to zero those out. And now we're just going to play the low shelving frequency is set at 99 hertz. We're just going to play the track and see what happens when we start turning the gain down.
To diagnose one's state of mentality, one must first observe his actions in the physicality. You can't just cut him open and look for something broken. You wouldn't know what to look for anyway. And through these observations, you may look for some relation to some similar case.
Okay, cutting that down helped out a lot. The track doesn't sound as full as it did before, but I was able to get more volume out of it without hitting any real distortion until that tom roll, not tom roll, but the drum roll right there. So that section may actually require a little different work with the mastering setup.
From days gone by, and from these realizations you begin examinations of his mind. Maybe he's got brief psychotic disorder, or perhaps.
Okay, in this case, the bass actually sounds better when I go back to a post EQ setup for the limiter. Oh, people are shooting off fireworks outside.
He has schizophreniform disorder. It's really hard to say within his mental
right, so I actually tried to increase the low frequencies up just 2 dB, and with the way things were set up with the attack, the release, then the output gain, it just started sounding too distorted. So going back to a negative 4 dB shelving at 99 hertz and the 6.5 plus dB at 3.17 kilohertz, we still sound pretty good at a 0 dB threshold with a knee of 4, which whatever that means. Attack is set at 11 milliseconds and the release is at 17 milliseconds with an output gain of 9 dB.
Inside the mind of a madman, there is nothing much to see. A ganglion of neurons and fatty tissues is all he be. Possible oxygen starvation caused this now monstrosity. Possibly. What else could it be? Inside the mind.
But there was a problem right there. When it hit that low tom, it sounded distorted. There was just too much there. It got too boomy. So we're still in an area where we're just doing too much. If we set this up pre-EQ, will that make a difference in that section?
What else could it be? Inside the.
It was okay up until the last hit. Then when the vocals came in, everything started sounding distorted again. So let's see if we can make some changes to the release or attack time, see what happens.
What else could it be? Inside the mind.
It got better. It was only distorted sounding on the last hit of that tom.
What else could it be? Inside the mind. Could it be? Inside the mind.
So that last hit of the tom, when everything comes in, that's where there's a problem coming in. It just sounds too distorted. Let's turn the compressor off and see if that actually happens without the compressor.
Could it be? Inside the mind.
If it's there, we don't notice it. At least not very much. If it's something to do with, say, the original input source clipped a little bit when it was recording, it's not prevalent enough to really notice when the compression, when the limiter is turned off. So we're going to do a little bit of testing here and see if we can just bring the output gain down and fix that. We're going to come down to 6 dB, see what happens.
Inside the mind.
Okay, at 6 dB, instead of being 9 dB output, that is definitely livable. So we're only changing a 3 dB output here, and that tom hit that was distorted before doesn't sound too bad now. But it can be affected a different way. We could actually go in and automate in those particular sections to get that distortion, that problem with the compressor out of there. And this would be something you could do by using mid-side processing. So you would mix the track down to 2 channels without the settings I made, put the track back into a 2-channel source, and then you would just set your mixer up, the input side, as your mid-side processor or your multi-band compressor or things like that. And if you were in the mid-side processor, you could set it up so that right at that point on the right-hand channel, you could dip down the EQ in the proper frequency range and bring it back up like that. So when it hit, you could smooth it out and then bring it back up. Automation is a big factor in the perceived loudness of the track. You want to bring up the music to be loud when the music is playing. When the music is backing off, you want your vocals loud and up front. You punch them way up front. all that has play in all of this. So these are the steps you have to take when you end up trying to master the track and getting the results you want. It's not just going to be a static setting, one size fits all kind of thing, and just leave it at that and expect it to work. It may not work for the way you want things to get done. So you have to be willing to put in the time. Man, they're shooting festival balls and everything out there tonight. I think I'd like to go see. Anyway, let's advance this track to where it gets into the louder portions and see if some of these similar settings still make sense. Okay, so now we're going to go to where the guitar solo comes in, and we're going to see how these settings work within there, because the vocals are gone, but that guitar comes out front. And let's see if that really ends up working fine with the kind of settings we have, or is it going to produce some kind of problem? And the way things sound right now, it sounds okay, but in all honesty, that's not how loud the guitar was when I mixed this. It changed. All right, so let's just see how that's going to play out while we make the adjustments so that it sounds that it's just like it was before. Inside. So we're going to start with the EQ. Okay, I'm thinking these settings work really well in the section where the guitar plays too, the guitar solo. Let's listen to that one more time. Definitely works there, but that's not the loudest part of this track. The loudest part is going to be this next section where the big chorus line comes in with the vocals here. So let's go ahead and turn the mix back on so we can just let it set it up as how it was originally mixed. Okay, so now we set that up there. We're going to go ahead and disable the mix again just so we can listen to this. And we're going to set this up just like it was before. We're going to -4 dB at 99 hertz shelving, 3.17 kilohertz with a 6.5 plus dB, 6 dB output on the compressor with a NEA 4. We're going to run, what was it, 35 milliseconds release on the compressor limiter and 11 millisecond attack. See what happens. Okay, in that section, right at the beginning, it sounds like maybe it's too much, right? So let's just go ahead and turn down the level a little bit, see what happens. We're going to go back down to 4. Going to 4 made a difference. It sounded more acceptable through the speakers, through your ears. Let's go back up to 6 though, 6 dB output. And we're going to go to pre-EQ settings for the compressor. Maybe. Let's try that again. I don't like that snare hit. I don't like how that sounds. Let's go back to post EQ and see if that changes it. I guess that's just how it is. That's just me. What if we were to change settings? Like, let's go ahead and bring the attack back to 0. So with this setting, there's not a lot of difference happening when I'm changing the attack time or the release time, at least not for this section. And that might simply be because it's so loud. It's even with the threshold set at 0 dB, using a NEA 4 on this compressor slash limiter, it's already pre-compressing everything in that point. So there's really not much more we can do with it. Now I've changed the threshold setting though, so that we're down -7 dB when it engages. So that might actually let us try to push more volume out. Inside the mind of man. Inside the mind of man. That made it maybe a little louder sounding, even though it wasn't really any louder. Because remember, we started at 0 dB and we were boosting 6 dB above that. Now we're starting at -7 dB and we've only boosted an additional 6 dB. So we've actually gone down 1 dB in what we're boosting overall for the overall output. What it's done though, it's just made things like the hi-hats coming out even harsher, and it's getting over compressed the way this is. The way this track is, it's better off just to leave it more dynamic. So we're going to go back to a 0 dB threshold, and we're going to bring the audio back down to just +6, the output just +6. All right, so really, based on the track, the settings that seem to work best is we pull the bass back down a little bit, even though we might want it to be louder to just be more balanced or sound fuller. We go ahead and boost the mid-range frequencies all the way to the high, through the high end. And then we're putting, at least in this case, we're putting a limiter with a very soft knee on it and only giving it a 6 dB output. We're going above the threshold of clipping so that it actually gives a little bit of a soft clipping effect to the output of the track. And it gives it that really loud sound. It's really punchy. It's not sounding distorted. It might even start sounding like it's a little bit saturated, but yeah, it's hard to tell because for me to really tell that, I need to do a side-by-side comparison and volume matched. For now, for shits and giggles, let's go back to the beginning of the track. And we're just going to hit a hard limiter and compress it again and see what does it really do to the overall sound.
Inside the mind of a madman, there is nothing much.
That's just with negative 13 dB threshold.
Product of the violence and smut is all he be. A possible chemical imbalance, maybe just water on.
Now I gave it an attack of 10 milliseconds and it smoothed it out.
That couldn't be. That's just silly.
But it's having this effect where the audio is coming up and down. You can just barely hear it. It's getting a little louder and then quieter. And I'm only using a 6 millisecond release.
To diagnose one state of mentality, one must first observe his actions in the physical.
And that's a really hard, long release there, 284 milliseconds.
Open and look for something broken. You wouldn't know what to look
That just
for
doesn't work. That doesn't sound good.
anyway. And through these
I mean, I could boost the volume up now, 18 dB, and be right back at 0 dB output.
some similar cases from days gone by. And from these realizations you begin examinations of his mind. Maybe he's got brief psychotic disorder. Or perhaps he has schizophreniform
That just does not sound good at all.
It's really hard to say within his mental state if he's only got one form or maybe all. And so we try to rationalize, hoping to conclude in time the ailments within our patient's head. But to dismay we come to say we cannot figure out what's wrong with him. is nothing much to see. A ganglion of neurons and fatty tissues is all he be. Possible oxygen starvation caused this
Now we set the EQ up with
monstrosity.
-4
Possibly.
at 99 hertz and
What else
plus
could it be?
6.5 dB at 3.17
Inside the
Kelvin.
mind of a madman, there is nothing much to see. Maybe this crazed psychotic killer suffers from malformed synapses. A generous blast of paranoia is all he really needs to do his deed. That despicable deed.
That's still just sounding over compressed. It sounds better with just a few dB of limiting within that softer knee and higher output gain. It just sounded more natural, more dynamic, and it didn't sound like it was overly distorted or over, like I said, not over compressed. It still sounded pretty darn good, and it was loud. It was very loud. It was probably louder than what we really needed to be. But in this case, that, of course, is where you would use a reference track to come into and make adjustments as necessary. I would probably, with this track, like I said earlier, want to go through and do a mix down on the disk, transfer it over to another file or another file, upload it onto one of the recording tracks, monitor tracks for mixing as a stereo file. I probably want to run it through multi-band compression because there's that section where it sounds like the drums and everything just hits too hard. The kick does, and the cymbals, everything is just kind of weird sounding there. Sounds like they get over compressed or whatever. I might want to use multi-band compression to help mellow that out and automate this stuff right then and there. And then, like I said, mid-side processing to kind of get rid of any spot there might sound like one of the low tom is distorted, and kind of bring down the bass a little bit in there to kind of smooth that over and get rid of it. Just make it not so noticeable. And then I also might want to add in some extra compression just to the mid channels there, and maybe do a little more cut EQ work to the side channels right there, just to see how it all blends together. And there's a possibility I might want to try some other things. Like I said, the parallel compression trick, the New York compression, see what that does. And of course, I said, I also, for the mix itself, I want to try to fix where I think I hear plosives from the main vocals. And then in the section where there's a big chorus line, I might actually want to use mid-side processing there to just make it sound even bigger, fuller right there. And you do that just by pushing up the side channels just a little bit over the mid channels. Because if you go too far, you start hearing the reality of how mid-side processing works. It's an illusion created by phasing. monophasing one direction, monophasing the other, and then being combined with a mono track that plays identically through left and right when they're all summed together. The mathematics of it all is what creates the process of mid-side processing and gives you that stereo illusion. And it only works until you get to the point to where you're just getting above, the side channels are just getting above where the mid channel is as far as this level goes. Then you start hearing this phased mono signal, which is basically it's left and right channel mono, but it's 180 degrees out of phase. So it's just like how the Matrix surround format works, or simulated stereo back in the 70s. And that's not what you want to get to. That's not the point we want there. So when it comes to trying to widen this field out, make it even bigger sounding in places like that, you got to be really careful with what you're doing there. A little bit goes a long way. And then there's other things. Like I said, parallel compression is one, but then we can also try other things where we just we duplicate the channel and we just run strictly a low pass filter or something like that and bring that up under and just amplify those sub frequencies a little more if you wanted to. And, you know, basically the sky's the limit, because when you do a setup like this, you're playing on just tracks, channels 1 and 2, right? But you're mixing then for the mastering through 24 more individual channels. That's about it. That's what I can show you for the night. But this shows that with the AW, you can still make really good sounding masters, and they are loud, powerful, punchy masters, even if you don't not playing rock music or whatever. Now, if you were playing, if you're doing electronic music, club music, techno, hip hop, dubstep, this machine can make any of that stuff sound just as good as anything else and be just as powerful, just as punchy. It all comes down to the skill set of the engineer running it. And the only way you're going to get those skills is by practicing. Practice, 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 practice. I've been using this guy since 2003, and there's still more and more and more stuff about this kind of work that I'm learning that I don't know. I just kind of run across it either online or I discover it by accident, and it's like, oh wow, I can try that and do. But this AW4416 and the siblings, they will do more than enough, everything that you need it to do to make a killer master for your music. Now, if there's issues where you just like the coloration of a certain processor, a certain compressor, or software off of a DAW that's made to do that, then by all means go ahead and do that. The AW4416 itself has the outputs to plug into other things and bring back in, so you can do stuff like that. It's all there for you. Just remember that it really comes down to your capabilities of what you can and cannot do. Anyway, hopefully this has been somewhat instructive for you. I'm pretty much talking about all this stuff off the top of my head. I don't have a script or anything I'm working off of, so it's real easy to get lost with all the information that I'm trying to convey and with everything that can really be said, what's out there. But you guys take it easy. If you got any other questions, go ahead and ask. I'll try to answer as best I can. Until then, I'll see you next time. Hey everyone, I just wanted to break in here at the end of the video and just say a few more words. One, I really do think that for most of us out there, especially those who are inexperienced in both mixing and or mastering, it's best to always treat it like the rule of thumb with mixing. Always come back to it with fresh ears before you really make the decisions on whether you're finished up or not. Because a lot of times, we'll be working on something, spending quite a bit of time on it all at once, and we'll think it's sounding pretty darn good, and then we go back to it, say like a day later, and we listen to it and it's like, oh no, that's not how I want it to be. That's just too much of this or not enough of that, right? So it's always a good idea to do that. Now in this particular track that I was showcasing in this video. My personal opinion is still that it's best to have this thing left almost like it was when the very first thing I did. Just running a Nia 4 on the AW4416 with no more than about 4 dB of output gain. And of course the EQ, brightening it up at the 3.17 kilohertz range with a shelving EQ from there on, and pulling down the low frequencies at 100 hertz. That's a good possibility, but it doesn't necessarily have to be done. Best thing to do is take it at that point and compare it to other similar songs. Maybe something like off Alice Cooper's Welcome to My Nightmare or his Billion Dollar Babies album, because those things, those tracks, that music is in a similar vein to what I was showcasing on this video. And if they come out to be about the same volume when you listen to them, the same perceived volume, then they're probably good enough just like they are. Like I said, the initial mix sounds good on its own, and just adjusting the overall EQ on the master channel is something that made it stand out better on the high end. And it just overall, it just sounds better in my opinion. But adding that little bit of compression to it helps boost it up louder without having to deal with a bunch of saturation. Well, in this case it would just actually be clipping. A little bit of soft clipping is okay, but not too much. And you don't want it to sound like it's over compressing the drums. And if I were to leave the track like it is right now, that's probably how I would do it. But with the small little problems that I heard in the track, from adding the compression on there, some EQ work, such as that distortion that happened within the first, oh shit, what would you call it? It's not really a drum roll, but it's just where the kick comes in and hits the cymbals and bam, 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 bam. But anyway, there was that part, and there was a part where the floor tom hit that caused what sounded like some distortion when things started boosting up. So I would probably like to go through again with this mix setup on a 2-track setting in the AW and just run it through multi-band compressors, maybe some mid-side processing, and see what that does before I get to the stereo bus, the master bus, and add those other features on there, like that global EQ basically is what we can call it, and the limiter that I had set up on it. Now the reality is this track is going to be part of a full-length album. It's actually still spans 3 discs. So I would probably master it in the format of the ladder that I just discussed, taking the 2-track mix and putting them up a new file, on a song file on the machine, have them all songs put together, run through all the same processes as needed to end up at the final outcome, just to create some level of cohesion amongst it all. But outside of that, I might actually do this next piece as a separate video. And until then, hopefully everything I've talked about on this video is something you guys can use. It makes sense, and it actually helps you when you're working with your own music. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. I'm going to go out here on the 4th of July, even though it's not a nice sunny day. I'm going to play with my dog some before I got to go. Take it easy.